I think one of the strangest things about the human brain is that sometimes it would rather keep you in something you already know is hurting you than let you step into something you've never experienced before. And when I first realized that, I honestly thought, that makes no sense. Why would I keep choosing something that makes me unhappy? Why would I keep going back to the same pattern? Why would I procrastinate on something I actually care about? Why would I stay in a situation I know isn't good for me? Why would I keep thinking about the same thing even though I've already thought about it 1,000 times? And I used to think the answer was simple. Maybe I'm just not disciplined enough. Maybe I'm weak. Maybe I don't actually want to change. But the more I started learning about the brain, the more I realized something. Sometimes, your brain isn't choosing what's best for you. It's choosing what's familiar. And those are two completely different things. We confuse familiar with safe. Think about something you've done so many times that you don't even think about it anymore. You wake up, you check your phone, you get ready, you do the same things, you take the same routes, you respond to people in the same ways, you have the same thoughts. You react to situations in ways you've reacted before. And because you've done it so many times, your brain doesn't have to work very hard to predict what's coming next. That's one of the things your brain is constantly trying to do, predict what happens next. And when something is familiar, there's less uncertainty. You already know what it feels like. You already know how to respond. You already know what happens afterwards, even if the outcome isn't good. And I think that's where we get confused, because we assume familiar equals safe. But that's not always true. Sometimes familiar just means known. And known isn't necessarily good. Think about the patterns you already know. This is where I started noticing it in myself. There are things I know I shouldn't do. And yet, sometimes they're the easiest things to do. Checking my phone when I should be working. Putting something off even though I know I'll feel worse later. Overthinking a conversation that has already happened. Going back to an old way of thinking because it's easier than challenging it. And I started asking myself, why? Why do I know exactly what I want to change and still find myself repeating the same behavior? And I think a lot of us have asked ourselves that. You know you should study. You don't. You know you should go to sleep. You stay awake. You know you need to have a difficult conversation. You avoid it. You know the relationship isn't good for you. You stay. You know you need to stop checking what someone is doing. You check again. And then afterwards, you blame yourself. You say, what's wrong with me? But maybe the better question is, what is my brain getting from repeating this? Your brain learns patterns. Your brain is constantly learning from repeated experiences. When a behavior repeatedly leads to an outcome, the brain can become more efficient at producing that behavior. That's part of what makes habits so powerful. You don't consciously sit there and decide, today I will perform this exact behavioral sequence. I've performed 400 times. You just do it. That's the point of a habit. It becomes easier and more automatic. And this is where I think people misunderstand change. We think knowing something should automatically make us behave differently. But knowing isn't the same as rewiring a pattern. You can know that something is bad for you and still be extremely practiced at doing it. You can know what you should do and still have a brain that's accustomed to doing something else. That's why changing your behavior can feel so uncomfortable. You're not just making a decision. You're interrupting a pattern, and uncertainty makes it harder. There's another part of this that I think is really important. Your brain doesn't just learn what is familiar. It also responds to uncertainty. And uncertainty can be uncomfortable because you don't know exactly what is going to happen. Think about starting something completely new. A new job, a new city, a new routine, a new relationship, a new version of yourself. Even when you know something could be better, there's still this strange feeling of, but what if? What if I fail? What if people don't like me? What if I regret it? What if I can't handle it? What if I change and don't recognize myself? And suddenly, the old situation starts looking strangely attractive. Not because it was good, because you knew it. That's why people sometimes stay stuck. And I want to be careful here, because I don't think this means every bad situation is secretly something your brain wants. Life is more complicated than that. People can stay in unhealthy situations for hundreds of different reasons. Fear, money, attachment, circumstances, lack of support, trauma, responsibilities. There isn't one psychological explanation for everything, but there is something useful in understanding this. Familiarity can make a pattern easier to repeat, and sometimes that's enough to keep us stuck. You don't have to love your situation to be attached to it. You just have to know it. The uncomfortable question, So I started asking myself something different. Instead of, why can't I change? I started asking, what part of this feels familiar to me? Because sometimes the thing you're trying to escape is also the thing you've learned how to function inside. Maybe you've become comfortable being the person who procrastinates. Maybe you've become comfortable being the person who overthinks. Maybe you've become comfortable being the person who keeps everyone happy. Maybe you've become comfortable being the person who never takes risks. Maybe you've become comfortable saying, that's just how I am. And that sentence can be incredibly dangerous because sometimes that's just how I am really means that's the pattern I've practiced the longest. Those aren't the same thing. Your brain isn't your enemy. And this is where I don't want this video to become another one of those "your brain is sabotaging you" videos. Because your brain isn't your enemy. Your brain is doing what brains do. It's learning. It's predicting. It's adapting. It's trying to reduce uncertainty. It's trying to make behavior more efficient. The problem is, something that helped you function before might not be what you need now. And I think that's one of the most important things to understand about personal growth. You don't have to hate the old version of yourself to outgrow it. You can understand why she became that way and still decide that you're becoming someone else. This is where change actually starts. I think we sometimes make change too dramatic. We imagine waking up one morning and suddenly becoming disciplined, suddenly confident, suddenly fearless, suddenly completely healed. I don't think that's how it works. I think change is much more boring than that. And honestly, that's good news, because it means you don't have to transform your entire life tomorrow. You just have to interrupt the pattern. If your automatic response is to check your phone, put it down. If your automatic response is to say yes, pause before answering. If your automatic response is to procrastinate, start for 5 minutes. If your automatic response is to overthink, write down what you actually know. If your automatic response is to avoid something, take one step towards it. You're giving your brain new evidence. We don't always do things the old way anymore. You don't have to feel ready. And I think this is something I personally need to remind myself of too. Sometimes we wait for change to feel natural. We think, when I feel motivated, I'll start. When I'm confident, I'll do it. When I'm less scared, I'll take the opportunity. When I feel ready, I'll change. But maybe that's backwards. Maybe sometimes you do the new thing first. And then your brain slowly learns, oh, we can do this too. That's how a new pattern gets a chance to become familiar. And eventually, the thing that once felt uncomfortable starts feeling normal. The part 1 want you to remember. So if you're stuck in a pattern right now, don't want you to immediately ask, what's wrong with me? Ask, what has my brain learned to expect? What behavior have I repeated? What response has become automatic? What am I calling my personality that might actually be a learned pattern? What am I calling comfort that might just be familiarity? And most importantly, what new behavior do I want to give my brain evidence for? Because you don't change your life by having one perfect thought. You change it by repeatedly giving yourself new experiences. You say no and discover that the world didn't end. You start and discover that starting wasn't as terrible as you imagined. You walk away and discover that you can survive the discomfort. You try something new and discover that uncertainty isn't the same thing as danger. And slowly, what once felt unfamiliar becomes familiar too. So maybe your brain isn't keeping you stuck because it doesn't want you to succeed. Maybe it's simply very good at repeating what it already knows. And if that's true, then you don't have to fight your brain. You have to teach it something new, because the life you want might feel uncomfortable at first, not because it's wrong for you, but because you haven't lived it yet. And I think that's something worth remembering. Sometimes the biggest difference between the life you have and the life you're trying to build isn't one huge decision. It's the tiny moment where you do something differently, even though the old way feels easier. And maybe that's what growth actually is, not becoming a completely different person overnight, just giving your brain enough evidence to believe that a different life is possible. Familiar doesn't always mean safe. Sometimes it just means you've practiced it.